minutes past 8. And we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Of course, they do have a website, that is creation.com. If you have burning questions, you need answers, you can jump onto creation.com with thousands of pages of information. You know, everything, evolution, creation, aliens, all sorts of different things. But, of course, if you do have questions, we'd love to hear them because Dr. John can answer them on air. And if you've got a question, chances are someone else has the same question. You can send those questions through to our text line via SMS 0401 949 949. Good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick. I mean, it's only a week since I was here, and you know how they say a week's a long time in politics. It's definitely a long time with coronavirus because, you know, we're now in a situation where the numbers are exploding in Victoria, and, yeah, here we are in New South Wales. We're right on the edge of possibly following that. And, I mean, when you think about it, 6 months ago, you know, who could possibly have imagined that Australia would be in a situation like we're in? Yeah. You know, the state border closures, we're a total police state, there's restrictions on movement. I mean, even, you know, can't go interstate easily for Victorians, even in local areas. You know, now they've got to wear masks, you know. They're being advised in New South Wales now. There was mention during the week that they might even have to have curfews in Melbourne. You know, I mean, this is Australia. I mean, that's just unimaginable, really, for all of us here. But it's now a reality. And I think some of these things that are happening have prompted some of the questions that we got. And we got one last week that I think we needed to address. It was a little bit involved, but you could paraphrase it actually by saying, you know, if God's in control, you know, why are we in the mess that we're in?
Yes.
Yeah. And look, I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? And the problem is this mess is worldwide. And lots of countries worldwide are in a far greater mess than we are in Australia.
Yes.
As if our mess isn't bad enough, you know, and over the rest of the world it's even worse. So what really is the answer? Is God in control? You know, this is what people are always asking. And, of course, the answer is that God, because he's the ultimate power both in our material universe and also in the spirit realm outside our universe, he has got total overall sovereignty. He's the creator. He made it all. But we look around and we see that it does seem to be in a terrible mess. The universe looks pretty good. You know, you look up in the night sky and the stars are going round there as they were. But here on Earth, you know, the mess seems to be incredible. Yeah. And look, the other thing that we need to realise about God, though, is that as well as his absolute perfection, he's also perfect integrity, you know, and he's not, you know, I suppose it's not politically correct to use the expression an Indian giver, you know, but God is not that. You know, he gives without strings attached, and he doesn't withdraw his gifts. And the greatest gift that he gave mankind at creation was the gift of free will.
Yeah.
Now, because we have been given free will, that means we have freedom of choice, and that included the possibility that the choice that mankind made wasn't going to be a wise one. And that's exactly what happened, of course. God warned Adam and Eve that in the day they ate the fruit of that particular forbidden tree, then they would die. And when they did just that, the dying and the aging process began, and that culminated in their eventual death. So, first of all, we did what God said not to do. And unfortunately, because that was an exercise of free will, then the entire human race is reaping the consequences.
Yeah. You see, in some parts of the world, some countries have said, hey, we're actually going for herd immunity. We're not going to, follow other countries. We're just going to let lots of people catch this disease, and then herd immunity should fix everything. And then over the last week or two, we've heard that, this disease there's more than one strain. People can get it twice. And a lot of people who get it have ongoing health effects. And so, this whole herd immunity idea, I guess, is people saying, hey, we think that, financial issues are more important than people and relationships. And I think that's really sad. But again, that's people making those decisions that in the long run affect and negatively affect a lot of people.
Yeah, well, look, that letting things take their course and developing herd immunity is an assumption because they didn't really know that would be the case, that it would give herd immunity. And let's face it, the common cold virus is a coronavirus, and you don't seem to get herd immunity from that too much, so that's an assumption. Obviously, lots of different countries in the world have tried different approaches, but and we've been more successful than most here in Australia, and we see it round here as being bad enough.
Yeah.
So, it must be pretty bad in some other parts of the world. If you look at our figures, the fatality rate in Australia is about 1%.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more than that in other parts of the world. I think in the US it's about 4 or 5, and it was very much worse in Spain and Italy right at the beginning. So, we've actually got off very lightly here in Australia.
Yeah, at this stage, absolutely. Keep praying, people. It is 8:15. You're on 94.9. We'll be back with Dr. John soon. If you have any questions, send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. It is 19 minutes past 8, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. He's been answering a question this morning that we had that came in last week. If God is working all the time and this is his world and we're his people, why is the world and the people deteriorating?
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about, and really the primary reason is because the gift that God gave mankind at creation was free will, and we did exercise that free will. We ate the forbidden fruit, and therefore we've ultimately got into the mess that we're in. But look, the Bible also tells us that the power of death is in the hands of the devil, in the hands of Satan. Now, what does that really mean? Obviously we can't see the devil. In fact, most of the world doesn't even believe he exists. But in some way, Satan is able to manipulate and influence our free will. And so somehow, he is connected with our sin. And if you think about what happened very early on in the piece, when Cain got angry with his brother Abel, God told Cain that sin was there waiting for him, and he had to overcome the temptation, but he didn't, and he murdered his brother Abel. Yeah. And Jesus says about, when he's talking about the devil, that he was a murderer and a liar from the beginning.
Yep.
So when he says that, you can see it in action when Cain murdered Abel. And of course, a liar is also a deceiver, and he deceived Eve and Adam, and that's what started it all. But somehow or other, I think, in the salvation message, how was God able to get back and do what he did through Jesus to redeem the world? And remember, we use that word redemption, which means to buy back. So how did he manage to buy the world back from, say, the power of the devil? And I think Satan made a fatal mistake with Jesus. And Paul actually alludes to this. He said, if the forces of darkness of this world had known, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. And what Satan would seem to have done is that he murdered the only man who was ever actually truly innocent. You see, every other man was never truly innocent, but Jesus was. And in doing that, I think that Satan has somehow acted illegally, and God has been able to then legally remove his authority from him. You see, God is perfection in every realm. He's the utmost in integrity. He's the utmost in perfect legality. He will never act outside the law that he himself instituted. So I think that's really the explanation for where Satan was able to manipulate people. But he hasn't gone away. You see, he's still here, and so are the demonic hordes, and they still influence us. Now, they no longer have authority over Christians. Jesus said as much. He said that all authority had been given to him, and he then handed that authority over to his followers and said, now you go into all the world and you preach the gospel, and you lay hands on the sick, you cast out the devil. He gave authority to his followers. I don't think we use it very much, but we do have it. And we do have the power to resist the devil. We can't say the devil made me do it, because we are able to resist him.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, interesting, isn't it? I mean, we look at that fatal mistake, and I mean, in the courts of heaven, that's basically the mistake. You say it was a fatal mistake. From our point of view, that was the opposite. It was a fatal mistake for him. It was the most awesome thing for us.
Yeah, it was a fatal mistake for Satan, all right. And,
yeah.
It's certainly going to bring about his ultimate death in the lake of fire.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a terrible mistake for him, but a wonderful intervention of God on our behalf. And as I said, as Christians now, the devil no longer has authority over us. But what about those who haven't submitted themselves to the Lordship of Christ? In the secular world, who don't even acknowledge him. And then you'd have to say that they really are still open slather to the influence of the devil.
Yeah.
And we then have to look at, how does the devil really influence people? I mean, it's not, sometimes it's in overt wickedness. It's not always overt wickedness. He's able to tempt them in some areas that all men are very, very...
949. Now, Dr. John, you've been answering a question in regards to, if God's in charge, why is there trouble in the world? That's paraphrasing. And I guess you've been telling us that, look, God didn't create a whole lot of robots. He actually gave us free will.
Yes, and it's the free will that really is the reason why the world is in the mess we're in, because people are able to exercise it. And people who are now Christians, we are called upon to resist the devil, and he will flee from us. But he still puts temptation in our path, and he certainly does that with the secular world, who don't acknowledge the Lord or don't even believe that he exists. And he's done that traditionally through temptation, through money in particular. Jesus said, you cannot serve God and mammon. And that mammon is a very, very interesting word. It really relates to trusting in power and riches and wealth and things like that. And if that's where your trust is, then it obviously isn't in God. And if you remember the story about the rich young ruler, he went away sorrowful when Jesus suggested that he had a lack, and it was related to his trust in his riches. So I've actually talked a lot about this on the program, how a lot of the worst disasters that we've seen in human history do seem to be money-driven. And, if you think of money or power or influence or whatever, think of things like the Titanic. We're probably trying to break records going across the Atlantic and ploughed into an iceberg. Even things on a smaller scale than that, like the White Island disaster in New Zealand recently, should they have been on the island? Who knows, And other things like, you remember that terrible collapse of a mullock hill in Wales that then buried a school with all the kids in the school, and some of the pollution problems we've had with rivers in Brazil and PNG and places like that. It's often related to cut corners. And we were talking last week, about viruses and bacteria and the mutations that occur in them, and how some of the problems that we've got with things like antibiotic resistance are related to the extensive use of antibiotics in animal husbandry, in the raising of livestock like cattle, sheep and pigs. And it's all money driven. Because, you see, the more intensive your farming, the more animals or birds you can cram into a small space, which you can't do if you don't use antibiotics, the more profit you make and the more likely you are to create or to allow the expression of mutant bacteria, which are not really tougher bacteria, but they are mutants and they are resistant to antibiotics. So there's lots of things that happen in the world that are related to money and power, and really that is people being under the influence of or tempted by the devil in those areas that they're susceptible to. You look at that terrible fire in London with the flammable cladding. The things that we're seeing down there in Sydney with the high-rise residential towers, where clearly some corners have been cut in the construction, and it's all related to money. I don't know whether you ever saw, it was a wonderful movie, the movie called The China Syndrome, starring Jane Fonda. It was out quite a few years ago, but this was talking about how there was a problem in the construction in a nuclear reactor. And it's a very, very instructive movie. It's called The China Syndrome, and it just shows the wickedness of man where money's concerned. And anyway, that probably leads a bit on to that other question that we got last week about how if the virus is mutating, is any vaccine that's produced likely to be effective against the mutants? And I mean, as you've mentioned, we are in this headlong rush to produce a vaccine because the world is absolutely screaming out for it. And the reward that is there at the end for the successful vaccine producers is enormous. Are we going to get proper testing? Who knows? We're going to have to wait and see. But look, I think it's questionable actually whether we are going to be able to get a vaccine that covers all the mutants, because viruses, as they mutate, just like bacteria as they mutate, those mutations tend to cause damage to the organism. They don't tend to make it any stronger or tougher. So it may be that the way that the vaccines are being produced these days is a little different to the way they were produced traditionally, and it may be that they don't, and I might talk about that when we come back too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even just hearing on the news now, in England, ordering, millions of vaccines, and they haven't really had time to fully test them. I mean, what if after a year or two there's some serious side effects? They don't know, and they won't know. And sadly, if lots of people get vaccinated and then all of a sudden they find out there's side effects, that can be a little damaging as well.
Yes, well, we'll talk about that when we come back.
Yes, you're on 94.9. It's 16 minutes to 9. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. From Creation Ministries International. We've been talking this morning about how God gave us free will and how, God, I guess in some ways, he didn't create robots. He allowed us to choose to do things wrong. And, it's our fault that things do go wrong on this planet because of sin, of course. And also talking about coronavirus and, it's been in the news a lot lately, how there's a few variants out there of coronavirus. And another question that we had come in was, will a vaccine actually work with all the variants of coronavirus if there are numerous events? I know that yesterday I read in the media there was 6 different variants. Whether or not that's true, I mean, the media tends to exaggerate sometimes, but regardless, we know there's more than one variant. So will those, the vaccines, will they work on those variations?
Look, I think, Mick, it's a question that's very hard to give a definite answer to, because if you think about the traditional vaccination programs that we've had for viruses, particularly like smallpox and polio, then you were actually given an infection with what they called an attenuated vaccine. That is an attenuated virus, a live virus in the very similar to smallpox or polio, but which actually didn't do you any harm. And you got infected with that, and you produced antibodies against that, and that gave you crossover immunity to the harmful smallpox or harmful polio. Mm-hmm. But the research that's going on at present has been a little bit different from that, as far as I understand it, because there's never actually been a successful vaccine produced against a coronavirus, and there are plenty of coronaviruses around the place. But it would seem that the research is trying to target a particular protein on the virus surface. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, if all the variants don't have that same particular protein, then the vaccine is not going to work against all the variants. So, look, as you said before, there's going to be a great need for very, very prolonged testing and so on, and that's difficult because the world is screaming out for it, tomorrow. And you mentioned before some of the reports in the media, and I read one only this morning. Oxford University think they've produced something that shows promise. Mm-hmm. And they were suggesting that one of the pharmaceutical companies is all geared up to produce 2 billion doses of it. That's quite a few. Yeah. So look, we are entering a very, very difficult territory in world history, because quite clearly there's a lot of financial reward at the end of it for somebody. Yeah. And mankind being the way he is, there's potential problems there.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Now, Dr. John, we also had a question last week in regards to sea level rise. Is it true? Is it real? Are the seas actually rising?
Yeah, well, look, I'm not sure whether that's true, because I've read that too. People have said that the sea level has risen slightly, 4 centimetres or so over how many years, but I really think that would be very, very difficult to prove. And maybe what has been going on here locally is what prompted the listener to ask that question. I mean, we've seen the terrible events that are going on at Womble right at this very minute, and they have happened in the past. 50 and 40 years ago, we had some terrible storms too that did similar damage along that foreshore at Womble. So whether it's, I don't think that that's really because of sea level rising. I mean, back 40 and 50 years ago, there wasn't really any talk of climate change. So I don't think that an event like that can be blamed on sea levels rising. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what the listener was asking the question about. I don't know. But look, are sea levels really rising anyway? And you know, whenever you hear mention of this on TV, you always get a film clip of some of the Pacific Islands where the water is lapping, right up the beach, and the implications are that the water is rising and those islands are going to be swamped.
You did talk about a place that you visited over in the Middle East that used to be 5 kilometres inland.
Actually, it was in the UK.
Oh, yeah, in the UK. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, look, coastlines change all the time, mm-hmm. But it's whether the actual sea level is rising. And in the Pacific Islands, what we do know is that the Pacific floor is very, very volatile. Islands pop up and go down over there in the Pacific. Yep. So if an island is apparently being overrun by water, then the likelihood is more that the island is sinking rather than the water level is rising. And there's one thing that we can say categorically from the Word of God. Mm-hmm. The Bible tells us absolutely specifically in Psalm 104 verse 8 that God has set the boundaries of the seas so that they are not going to again cover the earth. Mm-hmm. Now, you hear all of these reports about computer modelling that shows that if the sea level rose 1 metre, we'll get this, and 2 metres, we'll get that. It's not going to happen because God has set those boundaries of the seas according to His Word. And when you think about it, even if the entire Arctic ice cap were to melt, that wouldn't raise the sea levels 1 millimetre. Because the Arctic ice cap is an iceberg. It's floating. And icebergs, if they melt, they don't make any change in the water level. Because ice is less dense than water, that's why it floats. And as it melts, it just becomes water again, and the level does not rise at all. You can put an ice cube in a glass, it melts, and the water level doesn't rise. So really what we can say categorically from the Word of God is that the sea levels are not going to rise. And look, I think we need to say in conclusion really that the one thing that we can be absolutely certain of is that God's Word is true. What He has promised for us is going to come to pass. What He has prophesied will come to pass. And really, things are going to look very bad, I think, before Jesus returns. But He is going to come back for those who eagerly await Him. So look, I think as Christians, even though all of these disastrous things are happening around us in the world, we can be confident that Jesus is coming back. He is coming back for those who've put their trust in Him, and we really do not have any reason to fear.
Excellent. You're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Another awesome week. Thank you, Dr. John. And please send your questions in for next week, 0401 949 949. Send those questions through. We can answer them for you and for everybody else all at the same time. That is a text line, so you have to SMS them in. Don't leave a voicemail message. You are on 94.9. It's 3 minutes to 9. Good morning.